I'm Dan Siciliano. I'm the chairman of Silicon Valley Directors Exchange. My day job is running a fintech, and my other day job is serving on boards, including vice chair of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco and chair of the Federal Home Loan Bank system. We used to not be as busy as we are right now.
My name is Omar Abed. I'm the CEO of InvenSense. It's a holding of TDK, and we manufacture and sell semiconductor sensors from everything from cell phones to cars. I've also known Dan for about a decade. It's going on. So I'm here. I've been through. Actually, InvenSense itself was acquired by TDK, a Japanese company, and also I was the CEO of a company for about 8 years that was acquired by TE Connectivity as well. So gone through acquisitions and been part of an acquired company.
John Mikulski, sort of your classic 50-year Silicon Valley tech rat, and both ran companies as CEOs where we were acquirers and acquirees. After that, started working on various public and private boards and have been through numerous M&A activities, again, on both sides of the deal.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Lee from DLA Piper, and I'm a corporate partner based in the Silicon Valley office. And I represent both companies and investors, including private equity firms and corporations in their strategic investments, including M&A. And DLA Piper is a global law firm, and we work on a lot of global M&A.
Hello, I'm Stefan Sukut. I'm the president of Kestrel Partners. We specialize in M&A integration consulting. I'm also a vice president at Pritchett LLC in Dallas, Texas, which is probably the oldest M&A integration boutique consulting firm in the world. They started in the 1970s. I also have some experience on the board of directors. I've been involved in deals on the buy side, on the sell side, as well as divestitures. So trying to bring all of that perspective, all of those perspectives here to the table. Thank you.
Great. I'll take that back. We were trying to sort the microphone dilemma here. I think what we might do is, Stefan, I'm going to have you switch with me. Sorry for the shuffling game here. And I'm going to, because this way, Omar and Stefan can split one mic, and John and Jennifer can split this one a little more readily, if that works okay for you. I will take away my notes here. Well, we made big promises with the teaser, thank you, on this session. And one of the promises is that we're going to manage to tackle the ever elusive maximization of synergies in an M&A. And I say it with that funny intonation because depending on which side of the story you're on, whether you're an academic or a investment banker or perhaps the entrepreneur on the target side, if you're an academic, you put it in air quotes. If you're an investment banker, you lean in earnestly as you say it. And if you're the entrepreneur on the target side, you really believe it, right? And so we're gonna talk about the fact that fortunes have been won and lost, and companies have succeeded and failed over whether or not they execute well on actually achieving this maximization of synergies. And the angle we're going to try to take is like, what role does the board play in helping have oversight about this happening, helping make sure it actually happens, and when it does or doesn't happen for different reasons? And so we're going to kind of walk through that. And I think I might first, Jennifer, ask you with just kind of a kickoff question, which is something like, can you just very briefly scope out the board role in this, including which board we're probably talking most about in this particular narrative?
Sure. Oh, okay. Is it lean in?
We got you. Sorry.
Okay. So the board, I think typically when we're talking about the board's role in M&A integration, we're thinking of it from the buyer side. However, so I think some of the advice that we'll be giving today is from the buyer side, but there's also some tips that we may throw in if you're on the board of a potential target. So I think the role of the board in M&A is, I think there are two important roles. One is to exercise appropriate oversight over the M&A process, and that is from the beginning of the process. It's from structuring the deal, to diligence, and definitely before signing and closing. Um, and the second role that the board plays is just driving and driving value, and kind of setting a mindset of the strategic value of the deal from the top, because I think a lot of the executives and sometimes the advisors are very focused on the deal, but bringing it back to why we're doing the deal, what is the reason for trying to create the synergy and the strategic direction, can help to get deals done.
Great. I'm going to tease some of that out as we go through it, but maybe John, I'll invite you maybe to give us a way of parsing and sequencing the process here. And it isn't all just board driven. Obviously, this is more of like what companies go through. And again, we're talking about material M&A that inevitably is, integrated into strategy as part of the board's oversight function, but also just needle moving. Like if you get it wrong, people notice. If you get it right, good things happen. So maybe walk us through the way you kind of sort it out, and we might be able to break those into parts.
Right. When I think about M&A, I talk about M&A in 5 words, which is searching for targets, sifting through those targets. M&A is a lot of work, so you really want to pick targets that make sense for you. Digging, if you will, and when you start going through diligence, I mean, dig deep. Dealing, actually putting a deal together, and doing, which is integration, and all of those have to be attended to along the way, and certainly the board of the acquirer should understand exactly how all of those steps are done by the management of the company. Why did you select this target? I actually have a little instrument I call the SIFT tool, which is scoring the strategy of the deal. Can you really integrate the companies effectively? Can you really do it? Do the finances work out? And can you actually put a transaction together? The last thing you want to do is spend a lot of time, energy, and money with fine folks from Jennifer's organization, only to have it fall apart at the 11th hour. So those are kind of my key points.
And one of the things you pointed out when we were working ahead of time on the session is that, in your view, the integration work starts as early as the sifting phase. Could you just expand on that a little bit for us? Because I
Yeah,
wanted
for
to ask a
sure.
follow up on that.
What happens is, we all get turned on by the thrill of the hunt of putting the deal together, and any of you that or any of the listeners that have actually been involved in one of these things, it's really pretty exciting. It's pretty cool. You're talking to people and doing this and making deals and everything, and thinking about how the business is. But literally at the beginning, you should start thinking about, okay, how are we going to integrate this? This is going to take real resources. We're going to have to put one of the senior team members in charge of this. And this is going to be that person's, if not their full time job, certainly very significant part of it. And so you need to start thinking about, okay, who am I going to put in charge? What are likely to be the big issues around integration? Are we going to have a lot of personnel issues? Are we going to have a lot of system issues? Are we going to have a lot of customer issues? So literally start planning integration the minute you're sifting through potential targets.
Great, and I'm almost done setting the table. Then we'll get into some kind of specific details. I'm going to go Stefan next, and Stefan, I wondered if you could just give us your view of how boards tend to interact after an M&A deal closes around the integration, and how just kind of the pacing and pattern. You had kind of mentioned, the way in which boards are maybe, given some information, then a lot of time goes by. Maybe give us the what you think tends to happen, what you would prefer to happen, and then we're going to dig in details after I get Omar to tell us a couple stories.
I'm sure there's a wide range, right? Some boards are more hands-on, others are a little bit more removed. But by and large, really the key point in an M&A deal is when the management team goes to the board, or the CEO goes to the board and seeks approval for the M&A transaction. So then for that, of course, lots of work gets into preparing the material for the presentation to the board, the due diligence, and so on, the strategic rationale, all of these things. Then after the integration, what I think happens is there are pretty often like verbal updates that come, say, in periodic board meetings. Say you have a board meeting every 3 months, and then one of the topics is, oh, dear CEO, give us an update on how is this integration coming along. And of course, CEOs are smart people, and they are they have strong personalities. They don't really want to have often a whole lot of supervision. So what they say is, they give a verbal update, and it sounds okay to the uninitiated board member, but there's often not enough digging into the detail. So what I would suggest would be more that you come up almost with a dashboard to track the M&A integration success. Things like that would go into that is some of the financial information. How are some of the key synergies, realizing those? How is that coming along? Some metrics, right? Like you want to do cross sales, okay? Where are you? Are there some specific deals? What are the dollar numbers that you're shooting for? Are you closing something, and so on? So I think ideally you would have some sort of a dashboard that you look at things like retention, key employee retention. So first you establish a metric on what you want. Say you acquire an organization with 1,000 employees. Maybe there are 200 of them that you want to keep. You put an incentive, you put a retention bonus in place for these 200, and you should track the attrition of those 200 as over the next 8 or 12 quarters for a long time. M&A integration is really a long-term gig. There are some things you can do quickly, and you should do quickly, but tracking, or especially these synergies that will take time to realize on the revenue side, is going to be a long-term game. And that is why a dashboard that you look at every board meeting, I think, would be a best practice from my perspective.
And I'm going to come back in a minute. So be thinking about this. I'm going to want us to expand a little bit on what we really think are the synergies. Like, how do they manifest? What categories are they and what they do? But Omar, my question for you is a very broad one, because you are one of the few people who've actually had experience being the target in multiple situations, coming in after a target was acquired. Like, you've been on all ends of this, and Omar was very modest in his description. Like, he was the CEO of a turnaround, last fab in Silicon Valley. Just a remarkable story, which maybe at the reception you can get from him. It's just amazing. And you were a part of a German holding company in that story, right? So added complexity to that in terms of, I would suggest, knowing you, they didn't quite get the whole Silicon Valley thing outright. With that in mind, because so M&A happens for bolt-ons, roll-ups, augmentation, talent acquisition, patent portfolio acquisition, you name it. And we wouldn't say it this way, but the reduction of competition, I know that's not how we would brand it. What, in your experience, are and a particular style, much bigger entity acquiring a meaningful but much smaller target entity? What have been your observations about the most likely mistakes that you've experienced? Because we're going to tease that out later, but I'm just curious, like, they can be big or small, and you don't have to get into a lot of details because I'll pull those out of you in follow-up questions. But in that story, big player acquires important but smaller target, and what mistakes come of that in your experience?
That's an interesting question. So I would say, in the experiences I've been in, the biggest challenge is that sometimes you're being bought by a big machine. There's a process they run. They've probably done it well many times, but sometimes in executing the process, they forget the deal thesis. They forget what they bought and why they bought it and what's the underlying value. I've seen where actually the same holding company purchased a design house. So again, you're buying really, intellectuals and IP, and they went in and just absolutely crushed the environment and the culture. And so, of course, as people start leaving, yes, you still own the IP portfolio, but you've inherently lost what you bought. And so it looks like a successful integration, except that the value, really where you spent your money has gone away. It's similar thing happened actually at SMI. So this was a company that we ran fairly independently. It was under a German holding, I think because it was left for dead, they kind of let me have a long leash. And there was also an acquisition they made where they tried to do full integration, uh, and it just never worked. The clash between the German and the Silicon Valley cultures just never came together in a way that was successful. So I kind of
That is as
convinced them.
politely put as it could possibly have been put, for the record. But go ahead.
So the lucky thing is I built the trust, and honestly, they had nowhere to go. I mean, one of the first tasks they said was look at shutting it down, and I said give me some time. And so as we brought it up, we turned it around. They gave me a long leash because they really didn't have any other option. The alternative was to shut it down. And over time, we did kind of divert from their core business, and it made sense to divest. And we did so. Uh, and what the acquiring companies really liked was that we were fast, we were innovative, and we were able to bring products to market much quicker than much larger organizations and much more efficiently. And that was out of survival, to be honest. And then we got acquired by TE Connectivity, this large, multinational, multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company. They come in with the process. On the first day, the building's orange. Our logo is blue. They're putting overhead on the. Everything just slowly grinds to a halt. And again, I think they lost the fact that they were buying speed of innovation. That's what they liked. That's why we were stealing share from them and gaining on them, and why they acquired us. And in trying to do the integration in a very fixed manner, they lost sight of what they were actually buying. So those are examples.
That's a great starting point. I think I'm sure we'll get some questions too, and we can kind of dig that out. So maybe Stefan and anyone jump in as you like. All right, so let's go and define the synergies. What are these synergies that we're maximizing? You mentioned revenue. There have been some other allusions, but what are they typically? And then let's kind of break those down a little bit and talk more.
So around Silicon.
Point the microphone at you. Not
Audience. Around Silicon Valley, M&A deals, I would say 90 plus 99% plus of the deals are driven by revenue synergies. That is why you buy. Typically, you have already a company that's growing pretty fast. You want to accelerate the growth. You have a certain gap that you want to fill. Say, like Cisco had a gap in the network security space, so they bought Sourcefire to combine it with a Cisco technology, got to market really fast, took advantage of an opportunity. So those kinds of things. Cost synergies would be really if you can consolidate some infrastructure pieces, like say on the IT or administration side in general. Typically not the deal driver. It's like something that can happen. It's a good thing if it happens. And then sometimes you have deals that are really more strategic. So where you are, you're buying, say, some people call them tech and talent deals. So it's like a new technology. You don't really know yet what it can do, but you feel like you want to get this technology now because you feel like there's lots of potential. It's not really well defined what you can do, excuse me, with it, but you see that great potential. So those, I think, the three buckets I can see in synergies.
I think that the way I look at it is I always go back to the old TI line of create, make, and market. And so is the real focus the technology creation, new technology, and how that's done? Is it really the operation side where very often you're looking at cost efficiencies, or is it in the sales marketing side? And I think it's important to just be very, very clear about, okay, why are we doing this? And it's one of those things you ought to be able to say it succinctly in one sentence that's very clear to anybody who hears it. And always keep that at front of mind as you're doing your planning. Okay, we did this to the case you mentioned, we did this to get this technological talent. Well, if that's the reason we did it, we better make sure our integration plan, our integration actions are focused on doing that. Yeah, we got to make sure everybody's got door badges and all of that stuff. But, make sure you're focusing on what you really did this for.
I'm going to weave this together and come back to this idea of focusing on that attempting to create a dashboard, what are the metrics? How do you not make the mistake that Omar mentioned, which is if you measure the wrong things, it might look like a successful integration. I want to tie that together. But before we do that, Jennifer, you had mentioned a couple of times the idea of the diligence work and also just kind of not getting ahead of yourself in a process of M&A. But I want to focus on something in particular that you highlighted, which is there's a lot of expert information that comes to the fore during diligence. And I wonder, in part, to expand on what John was talking about, to understand where you are in these different buckets, what are some of the best practices for the board to tap the hard work and expertise that's gone into the diligence efforts, whether it's talking to the experts, reviewing their reports, or all the above? Can you expand on that a little bit?
So the board can do a few things to make sure that the integration is happening from the beginning, and that would include diligence, um, getting all of like communication with all of the stakeholders involved, including the executives, the management that's working on it, the legal advisors, accountants, and or tax advisors, and making sure that all of them have an idea of the strategy and the reason for the deal. And then I think this is probably for larger deals, but getting reports from management on every stage of the diligence that probably wouldn't happen if it was a smaller deal, but just um, having oversight over the diligence process, because a lot of the information that comes out in diligence, it's all about integration, and the M&A is about integration. It's these two parties that maybe they look good on paper together, but then if they can't actually integrate and become something of value, then it doesn't it's not what you expected. um, and then another thing a board can do is try to have continuity in the integration team that's working on the diligence, and making sure that there are some people who are the same, that continue with the post closing integration, because otherwise there can be a lot of knowledge that's lost without the continuity of the team.
I appreciate that because these best practices sound a little daunting, right? I mean, to achieve all this analysis, the parsing of what category you're in, how to keep track of it. But I think making that point, it highlights that the board at least has arguably at its fingertips, resources. Now consuming, implementing them is a whole different thing and takes a lot of effort. So let me weave that a little bit together and ask a hard question that sort of is a trick question about culture and how to deal with that in integration, but also is just, mechanical. And that is, let's assume you put together all the best practices we just talked about. So you've got the search, sift, you know, uh, digging, dealing, and doing. Now we know you start thinking about integration at the sift. That's just a second. In the digging and the diligence, you actually get a lot of information about that. And then once it starts happening, you set up a dashboard, you highlight the thesis, you kind of hold everyone accountable to that. But help me understand what the metrics would be, kind of if you're turning into like quarterly KPIs or something, but like what would the metrics be for a given deal that it's easy in I theorize that it's easy to identify a bunch of metrics that you can check the box because they're knowable, quantifiable, they have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and yet you might miss a lot of stuff. Take Omar's case. So is the ERP integrated? Did we rebrand in a way that was consistent? Does everyone have the same security training? Did they all get there's a bunch of stuff you can check, which is sort of integration-ish, maybe the blocking and tackling integration, but you run the risk of missing the thesis. And I wonder, could you expand on how to match this visibility that goes to the board and the checking of boxes with the outcomes you want without getting distracted by, for example, repeated reports about our websites are now unified, our accounting is now the same, our IP has been validated. I mean, that's important, but it doesn't sound like it gets at anything. Sorry for the long lead in, but that's kind of a complicated idea. Who wants to go first? All of you should speak to this.
Well, let's pick a specific. You did the deal because there's either more of the same revenue of what you already do, or it's revenue in a new category, a new product or service category. Well, that's something that uh, two things. Number one is when you're doing the deal, not because anybody's trying to be evasive or lying, but the forecasts of revenues you get from the target are going to be optimistic because they're put together by the sales team of the target. And if you're in sales and you're not optimistic, you're in the wrong job. So the first thing to do is to say, okay, they said they'd sell 100. You probably ought to make your business plan that they're going to sell 80. And so you got some maneuvering room. And then that's something that you should be tracking. I think the board should be tracking, certainly for the first year, probably monthly. And not in a really offensive way, but to hear it once a quarter, number one, the game's over at, by that point. So if you're not seeing, steady, on that particular example, maybe in some of the cases you worked on, it's, okay, we've got a product development process, you got the gates along the way. Did they pass the gate on did they deliver on time, on spec, on budget?
Yeah, Omar, you want to expand on that? Thank you, John. I think that was great. But Omar, maybe your ideas in that regard.
No, I agree. I think when you're acquiring, obviously the, the selling entity is going to have an optimistic projection. And I think to your point, tracking that is super critical. I would also say on the synergy side, my experience, and again, I'm always acquired, and then I get handed, here's the deal model, right? You got to make it happen. Now you're the CEO. Now you work for us. Make this happen. I often find the cost-based synergies are more realizable. The hit rate on those is much higher. The revenue or the growth, much less so. And so I think going into the deal, always thinking about that, just my limited experience. But again, I think people tend to be, even on the acquiring side, optimistic. I think that's the other, let's say, twist of optimism that gets added onto the already optimistic forecast. So again, I think tracking that. What's hard though, coming back to your question, is the soft stuff. If culture or a process of innovation is critical to why you're buying something, how do you preserve that? I think that's something where you have to be very, if that's part of the deal thesis, you have to track that and be very diligent about monitoring it as you're doing integration, making sure you're not destroying the underlying value at which you seek to, integrate.
Yeah, maybe just to add to this, especially the soft pieces, and which kind of ties to the revenue synergies, which are hard to track, and it's a lagging indicator, right? You see the revenue, it's a lagging indicator. So one idea, and a suggestion I would have, that some companies are doing that, they use like what's called a net promoter score. So you do apply that within the organization. You can also apply it to customers, and you can track that, which is really more testing. It's really testing more the how people feel about, say, the supplier, if it's a customer, or how they feel within the organization. Are they talking to other people and say, oh, this is a great company to work for? Especially if you think about the people that just got acquired, right? How do they feel about the company? Because if the people don't feel good about it, especially say the salespeople, right? And you see some salespeople leaving, you got a problem that you probably will see 3 or 6 months later. So that's one idea to how to get to that.
And let me ask Jennifer, maybe if you expand on this. In my experience, 4-ish medium-sized deals, it's always the lawyers I find who bring to the table what might be a proxy for culture issues, right? So you've got litigation history. It shows up in diligence and people talk about it. Could you maybe tie that together a little bit? Like, how does a board get at the ideas of whether or not they're going to be able to preserve, if the culture has a particular flavor that's important to them, how they're going to preserve the culture, how they keep the best of it, avoid the worst of it? Maybe we can get to the surprises part. We'll talk. Well, that'll be a separate question, which is how to manage or avoid surprises. But maybe expand on that a little.
Yeah. So the people who are doing the diligence, whether it's legal diligence or the business diligence, they can. There are things that stand out in diligence. I can give some hints on the culture of the target company. For example, if there were, if there was any past litigation or any claims for, related to an employment. If there are a lot of employees, a lot of turnover in the company for various reasons, and diligencing the different locations and geographies that the company does business in. All of those, they're very close to the documents and the details when they're doing diligence, so that you can get a lot of information from them. And I think the hard part from anyone's perspective, and is the difference in the personalities. When you're dealing with people, and you need to integrate culture, then how do you put two management team? Someone needs to be a CEO of one company, and maybe if they don't have the title of CEO, or maybe they do, but dealing with sometimes personalities that don't match, or just beliefs that are different. And I think the board in that case can communicate, like having a lot of communication with the management team, to check in about where people are in the company, if people are happy, if they're communicated uh, clearly about what their benefits are, their targets, and the future, and where the company's going, um, and uh, and then making decisions if necessary to make sure that the culture is heading in the right direction.
I want to throw it open to questions in just a second. So be thinking about that. I don't have the advantage of all the questions that people are posing online, scrolling by me and get to cherry pick them. Now, part of the secret sauce is like, oh, yeah, such good questions. Yeah, people give them to me. But before we switch to questions, maybe a broader question. It's a little contrarian, but it's insightful, I think, which is, what is it that you think boards should avoid doing or avoid falling into as a problem, a behavior, a focus that you think is the wrong focus, something that they do but shouldn't. You can say something they don't do but should, but it's better. I think it's actually more helpful that boards sometimes do X, don't do that. Is there something that comes to mind in kind of again at the integration phase, probably more than anything else? Although Jennifer, you have permission to talk about during the whole process, because in fact, why don't we start with you? Because I think I know what your one of your answers is, which is don't get ahead of yourselves. And so want to expand on that a little bit when boards kind of start focusing on the finish line, but there's a lot between here and there.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. I don't need to repeat it because you said it exactly. No,
But
no, no,
give
no.
us the
Thank
examples
you.
though. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think um, the what the board should not do is not have a lack of planning or a lack of oversight over the process, because that can lead to people who are actually working on the deal not understanding the strategic fit. It can miss potential risks and the ability to mitigate the risk earlier, related to, and what comes up in diligence a lot is sometimes regulatory issues that can cause um, either time delays or other issues down the line. And often those are in the areas of antitrust and competition, sometimes environmental regulations or data protection and cyber sometimes are obstacles. And in addition, some non-US jurisdictions, if there's any employees who are entitled to notice, sometimes it's a very long period that wasn't anticipated in advance. So um, failing to maintain the proper oversight, and also failing to maintain independence. So I think when in any M&A transaction, there's potential, there's board dynamics too. Who's going to stay on the board? Who's going to leave the board? And maintaining some independence where there are different voices heard and diversity and knowledge and experiences on the board, definitely help the board make get to a better deal, and ultimately hopefully reduce the risk of litigation.
Great. And so what other items should boards not to do? It can be even later in the process.
Not assume it's business as usual. If you have an M&A task going on, just once a quarter at the quarterly meeting, talking about it for 30 minutes is not adequate. If it's a serious M&A thing, that probably merits an interesting review level once a month, I would say, or something on that order, because it's not business as usual.
Great. Stefan, and then
Right,
Omar.
maybe just to add to that, I think maybe a more drastic comment would be the board should not check out after the deal is closed. And sometimes you may hear from the CEO and others, hey, in the big celebration, right? the deal is closed, hooray. And then the board may think, the uninitiated board may think, oh, great, it's all done now. Along what John was saying, now it's like, oh, integration is pretty trivial, should not be a big deal. So let's just have and the CEO, of course, would typically say, yeah, we're just handling
Everything's
it.
fine.
Yeah. So that is, I think that is the biggest concern. And then maybe just to what Jennifer was saying earlier, when you have these waiting periods, I was in a deal that had a waiting period of 9 months, but the CEO of the acquiring company and the management team had the wisdom to realize once the deal is announced, you need to do integration. You need to do integration before them, but you need to really get very active. And Jennifer, as you were saying before, communication strategy is critical. You need to communicate, even if nothing much is happening. But during this 9-month period, we did an enormous amount of integration planning. And these were big companies with thousands of employees on both sides. So, and you had also cultural differences because one company was based in the Netherlands. The other one was a US company. One was public. The other one was private. It was actually a private company buying a public company in the Netherlands. So, all of this. So you had the time. And then from a board perspective, again, no, don't check out. Think about how do the people feel? What can you do now? And when you talk to your legal counsel, you may be surprised how much you actually can do during this waiting period. So,
And that's an interesting point worth expanding on. The time frame between signing and closing is, if anything, expanding. See our prior seminars on the rise of antitrust and other matters that used to be more benign or less frequent, now quite prominent and probably accelerating. And I think parsing what you can and can't do with the careful advice of counsel is a strategic question then, right? So you've got somewhat at-risk use of resources, but if it's appropriate and legal, that oftentimes ends up being at least a board interactive discussion with management. So I think it's really
and
helpful
maybe
to
just
tease out.
another really quick one is that during this waiting period, as an example, you can have it's not a clean room, you have a ring fence team of people that can be engineers, as an example, right? They're working right together on how do they integrate the technology during this HSR waiting period. And then it accelerates the time to market once a deal is closed, because they've already done lots of work and they can just press the button and boom, get going and beat the competition. I've seen that done very well at Cisco in one of the deals.
Omar.
Actually, yeah, I was just gonna say I actually lived through that. So after we were acquired, I was asked to lead They had already made an anchor acquisition. They added us, and there was another one they were making. It was a Berlin, a German company, and it took actually 16 months, yeah, from signing to they could finally go in. But to your point, a lot of work was done with engineers on aligning roadmaps, strategy, looking at the manufacturing footprint. We couldn't actually take action on things. We couldn't communicate with customers. But again, a lot of that groundwork and a lot of the integration activities were underway. In that kind of holding period. Unfortunately, it is not ideal. It definitely made things a little bit more complicated. We lost a few more heads than we would have liked along the way, but at the end, we were able to be productive in that holding period.
I have several questions about founder-led company acquisitions, some ESG culture issues, the role of HR throughout this process. But before we pose those, I'm happy to pose those. I mentioned them because maybe people have questions. Let's see if there are any questions from the audience. Don't be shy. See, look, you're shy when you're in person. It's not as okay. Go ahead. So that they can hear you online. We can hear you.
Thank you. So we mentioned that culture is a big, say, driver once you've closed the deal. What has worked? What do you feel has worked to really integrate the culture and, really make the target company and the acquirer feel like they would like to be successful together?
Okay, hard question. Can you give us examples of what has worked, particularly cultures at the center of it? Who wants to go first? John. Then Omar.
Let's see. Number one, it just being respectful.
right off the bat, in all the different ways. Have a great day one experience. So that people say, wow, this is it's a pretty cool outfit. I like the people that I've met. Realize that everybody, certainly on the acquiree side, is going to have that what about me moment. Okay, how am I going to come out of this? Just being there a lot is a big part of it. Walking around, talking to people, learning about them. It's kind of no different than your first day at the college dorm. Is oh, you're my roommate. Okay, who's next door? What are they about?
Omar.
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, actually, before you make the deal, the due diligence process, I think you touched on, Jennifer, a few points about looking at some of the legal activity and things to understand what kind of culture do they have. Will that be, fundamentally different? Is there a big gap to fill to bring the two companies together? I think first of all, understanding how big of a mountain you have to climb there. Ideally, you find targets that are closer in nature to you. The other thing I've seen, and I'm going through this, is full integration, which was the first acquisition I went through as a CEO coming in, versus at TDK now, a Japanese company, where it's almost like a holding. So they really let us have their Japanese company, and actually, if you look at their history, they're famous for cassette tapes. That's really the last claim to fame. The rest of their kind of core businesses have been acquisitions that they just kind of left and let run. So that's another thing. If there's too big of a divide, maybe more of a holding than a full head-on integration is another way to preserve the value and the culture. But I also think it's about bring the people in, be respectful, hear them out, and have them be part of the committee that's part of the integration. And I think that's another key aspect as you work through it together. And I think going to the people first before you get to the hard stuff, I think that's extremely critical. Win them over, get them on your side, and then proceed. I think that's also a first step once you finally cross the line in the deal.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what John and Omar just said. And in fact, in this one deal I mentioned earlier, they did exactly that. There were lots of meetings early on before you get into the hard pieces. And then they actually measured the NPS, the Net Promoter Score. And guess what? At the acquired company in the Netherlands, that Net Promoter Score went up big time. It was significant, very significant. And before then, they had lots of attrition at that company in the Netherlands. It changed. So that tells you how much, just with respect, proactive communication, reaching out, being transparent, what you don't know, making sure that we had at the steering committee the senior executives of the acquired company. They were on it. So that helped tremendously to set this particular deal up for success.
Any other thoughts on that? I'll throw out an example. So I built a software company that grew pretty big, and then we got bought by Thoma Bravo, and they fed us to Highland Software, which was their biggest portfolio company at the time. And kind of to a point, without a lot of communication, I call it the 3 C's error. They changed the colors on day one, right? And again, we were far away. They were in Cleveland, we were in Phoenix and San Jose. They changed the coffee, which literally almost created a riot. They didn't use Starbucks, and they took it away because they had a master lease with whoever. And then finally they changed the cafe food offerings, right? Which and oddly it was sort of cultural, right? We were in the Southwest and we had a certain, and suddenly there was people were like, what is this food? What's going on? Right. And again, I don't think any of it by itself was material, but there was a sort of feeling of disrespect that they recovered and they did okay. But it's again, I'm not sure it's the board's role to say don't do this, don't do this, but there is a signaling that can come from the board, which I think, and I want to turn this into a question for you, Jennifer, then turn to more questions, that has higher prominence now in boards and is a bigger part of the conversation than this happened many years ago, not many years ago, 8 years ago, where culture, ESG, kind of human capital sensitivity is kind of front and center. And I would say that the workforce also has changed. I work with a lot of companies where young millennials will raise their hand and say, well, don't we get to vote on whether we want an acquisition? It's like, actually, no, you do not get to vote on whether you can have the acquisition. But so in light of that, what are some of the best practices that the board can use from its other work around these issues to make sure that is consistent with its M&A behavior, meaning, human capital, et cetera, in your experience? And anyone else too, and then we'll maybe open to more questions.
So ESG has become increasingly important, not only to the people in the companies, but also to customers and vendors and partners. So it is something that that matters and makes a difference in terms of business potential and prospects. So something to look for. So they're I think looking at the two companies in advance of the closing and looking for things like, do they have similar policies on diversity or social matters? Do they, what do their people care about? What's important to them? What kinds of activities do they do? Um, and that, the more similar they are, I think the easier it would be to merge the cultures. But without that, it still can be done. It's just hard work. And the communication, as the everyone has been stressing, the communication and making sure that the employees are aware of what's going on in their future. Because I think one risk is, as soon as employees hear there's an acquisition, they start looking around and at potential other opportunities if they don't know what is going to happen to them. So, um, and then another thing that boards can do for ESG is have diversity of discussion and viewpoints on their own board, so that they can hopefully come to diversity of opinions, and then also sometimes checking any you know dominant voices on the board when there's discussion and decision making, so that everyone can be heard.
Other questions for the panel? Got two.
All excellent insights. As you look back and reflect for a moment on the various acquisition integration experiences you've had, share with us, is there any one thing in particular that you wish you had done that did not occur?
We're gonna have Omar go first on that one.
Oh, well,
That's the target. Is it 'cause
Or
it's a
another
long
perspective
list?
simply would
no,
be,
no, no, yeah.
no,
that's
or another
right.
perspective would be, is there something you wish you had done differently in
Yeah,
retrospect?
I think in the current situation I'm in, I think so. The company was acquired at a very high premium. And I think with that came a lot of expectation. The synergy numbers were just astronomical, to be honest, to justify the deal. I would say earlier on, after the closing, there should have been a kind of get together and sort of impairment of expectations, if you will, early on, because what ended up happening is that you end up doing outrageous things, which actually stall the development of the company. And I would say having that hard conversation early, actually more up, not so much with the people, and resetting those expectations and saying, look, this might be a good entity, but we paid too much.
Maybe
A
I
rare,
can,
sobering conversation.
Sorry. Yeah.
maybe I can just add to that from an experience at a big networking company, and I think it happens often that synergies get exaggerated to make a deal happen, and what, but it's like this. So you have all of these high-powered MBAs. They're doing the financial analysis. They're doing the discounted cash flow valuation, and they have these tiers of different synergies. And then based on that, you justify the deal. That is good, but maybe not the best thing to do. So, say, if example, if you look into sales multiples or other multiples, what you get there is a little bit of what I call the option value. There is some stuff you don't know yet that may drive synergies, and then on the other hand, if you are, what happens sometimes if your synergies are exaggerated, I agree, you should have some sort of a reset. And from a board level, when you see that the acquisition target is not meeting you have a wide gap, and you start to realize, drill down in your questions, you realize they are never going to get these revenue synergies. So then I think it is better to do a reset and say, come up with some realistic numbers for targets going forward, because otherwise people are just going to leave. The best people are going to leave first because they realize it's impossible to make the numbers.
Another question. Yeah.
Building on- I have so many questions, but I'll just build on that last one. But so what can you do as you're negotiating the deal to make sure that the deal is actually something that both the target and the acquirer feel is something that is reasonable, instead of having your sort of day one be this, oh, okay, well, let's toss out the set of numbers that we built the thesis on and start with something new, which is not gratifying to anyone. And related to that, have you seen any interesting deal structures that create incentive for the target management team to, earn outs or things like that you've seen productive?
That deserves a whole follow-up session.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but we appreciate that. But any comments about?
Yeah.
And we have one last question.
Yeah, well, I think following on a comment I made earlier and has been expanded on, for the acquirer, I think that as you're going through the negotiations, it's a give and take. I mean, that's just life. But the board and financial people, the CFO and the CEO, should really have a conversation. Okay, we believe these are all of the synergies. We believe this is all the happy stuff that's going to happen. Let's assume that we're off by 20%. If that happened, how would we feel about this? We're not going to be happy, but are we devastated? Or maybe even worse is, wow, when we, do our quarterly report and we're on the mic at 1:30 in the afternoon. Oh, by the way, that deal that we all told you investors was going to be this or that, well, it didn't happen so well. And so I think that that's a good sort of safety valve to have, a safety net.
Couple of years ago, I gave a presentation here entitled "Mergers of Equals Never Work," and I was
There's no
wondering
such thing.
if you had any good success stories, or you could maybe, Jennifer, if you relative to how you position the all the due diligence work on that, if it's any different.
So usually there's one party with more leverage. I don't think I've ever worked on an acquisition where they're, two equals and they like completely equal. But it definitely does change the diligence process and the scope of the diligence and how detailed the buyer is doing diligence. So and part of it is the strategic reason behind it too. So if there's a strategic reason why the buyer really, really wants this company, and you know, the best financial valuation model, doesn't necessarily work for the buyer, because, like, I don't know who said this quote, and I'm not able to give them credit for it, but value is in the eye of the beholder. So often I've seen investment bankers or other advisors try to increase the value of a deal when there aren't really other any numbers changing the metrics that would drive that up, and that's how valuations can sometimes get increased. And
5% of a bigger number is a bigger number.
yeah, so I think Yeah, that's all.
So the premise is there are no equal mergers of equals. I think that's fair. Stefan, I'm gonna have this be you get the wrap up comment and everyone gets to say one or two things we want to take away from
Okay,
today. And then go ahead. But,
I go
yeah.
really quick. So mergers of equals sounds kind of good in concept, but and what I have seen is that you want to have a highly collaborative approach between the two parties, the two companies involved. But there's always, sometimes people call it a tiebreaker. The tiebreaker is the acquirer, you know, but you can, other than that, you can have, you know, lots of collaboration. That's a good thing. You don't want to be on your, you know, you don't want to be looking down. It goes back to the respect thing, right? You don't want to look down to the acquired company. You want to have a collaborative approach.
So my final question is one takeaway you want the audience to have. It could be something you already said and you just want to reemphasize, something you want them to read or something you want them to do or not do, but just kind of one takeaway. John, you're gonna go first, and I'm gonna go Stefan, I'll let you have it, and then Jennifer and Omar.
Planning, the integration starts at sifting and selection the target.
Great. Stefan?
As a board member, make sure you get a dashboard that has some metrics on it, not just words.
All right, Jennifer.
Create the importance of value from the top down, and keep a big picture strategy in mind.
Omar, you get final word.
Yeah, I'll just say make sure that the deal thesis is known by all of those involved in integration, so they know what's important and what's maybe less important and more compromisable. So
Great. Well, we are once again out of time. I certainly enjoyed having the panel participate. Thank you very much for your expertise. Round of applause for you guys.